All right, let's talk Alabama Crimson Tide. Obviously, Alabama preparing for a massive matchup in the SEC championship game. All eyes on Bama and Georgia to see who comes on top in the biggest SEC game of the year, probably the biggest game of the year before we get to the playoff every single year. But there's great news for Alabama ahead of this matchup that I think is a good sign for the Crimson Tide and their playoff chances. We'll get into the reporting there, plus some interesting data. But first, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Alabama heads into this game, of course, against the Georgia Bulldogs with some momentum. Obviously, it's a tough matchup. Georgia's one of the best teams in the country. It is a rivalry game of rivalry games. Alabama got the better of the Bulldogs in recent matchups, but all that's going to be put to the side, of course, in Atlanta to see who comes out on top and wins the SEC and gets that automatic berth. But let's talk about Alabama and their postseason situation. Obviously, right now, the way things currently sit, they're in the playoffs, but you have to take a deeper look and look at the structure of the way things are based on the committee's latest, what they put out most recently in terms of their bracket and their rankings. And you get a clear picture of Alabama's situation. So let's pull up the rankings here first. Again, per the playoff committee that came out a few days ago. I really hate the way they organize this graphic. It's left to right and then top to bottom, so it's kind of a weird structure. But you have Ohio State, of course, at 1, Indiana at 2, Georgia at 3, then you've got Texas Tech at 4, Oregon at 5, Ole Miss at 6, A&M at 7, Oklahoma at 8, and Alabama then at 9, followed by Notre Dame, BYU, Miami, Texas, Vanderbilt, and then Utah. Rounding out the top 15, you can see the other 10 programs there to round out the top 25. So let's talk about the rankings here for a second, then we'll get to the bracket. So there's a couple things you'll notice here, is that there are teams, Notre Dame, Miami, Texas, Vanderbilt, and specifically Notre Dame, Miami, and Vanderbilt that have 2 losses. They're 10-2, that Alabama is ahead of. That is important. Obviously, Alabama heading into a matchup against the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC championship game. They win their end. We all understand that. But what happens if Alabama loses? That's going to be an interesting debate because at that point, Alabama would have 3 losses, 10-3. Would a 10-2 team surpass Alabama? Would they jump Alabama? And based on what we're seeing here, based on this rankings, and we'll get to the bracket into a second that says a very similar message, I think if Alabama loses a close game, they're still in. Right, because this is a team that beat Georgia 24-21 earlier this season. Obviously, they're a good team. We all understand that Alabama, they had a letdown against Oklahoma, but Oklahoma's a playoff team, right? They had a letdown week 1 against FSU for sure, and that's kind of the big ugly mark on their resume right now. That's undeniable. But the committee is clearly, if you look at Notre Dame, Miami, for example, put aside week 1 defeats. They kind of sit there and say, not nearly as important as as some other games. So the reality is the Alabama Crimson Tide are in a good spot. And if they lose to Georgia, which whether they do or not, we'll talk about the matchup a little bit later, I don't think they're eliminated as long as it's close, right? As long as it's a competitive game. Now, if they go out there and get schmacked, that's going to be a tough look, right? And obviously, you look at fans of the Miami Hurricanes and fans of a lot of these other teams are hoping that the Tide get absolutely smacked. I don't think they will, but that's going to be part of Kalen DeBoer, sort of the mindset for the Crimson Tide here a little bit, is if they are competitive and they play a good game against Georgia, again, right now, the number 3 team in the country, who Alabama's already beaten, if it's a close game, goes down to the wire, right, and Alabama loses, I think they still get in, right? If it's a close, because at that point, they still have 10 wins. They've already beaten Georgia, and they lost a close game in a neutral site in a playoff atmosphere. That feels like a playoff team. And the committee is telling you the exact same thing. Because if you look at the rankings right now, let's say if Alabama would have been 12, let's just say, and they had Miami at 11, and they had Notre Dame and Miami ahead of Alabama. Let's just say that, right? Which by the way is not the most implausible thing in the world if you just look at sheer rankings and data. But if they had, let's say, Miami and or Notre Dame ahead of Alabama, then that would have been a red flag. In fact, if you look at the 2 lost teams, only Oklahoma has a higher ranking than Alabama, and Oklahoma recently beat the Tide, obviously. That tells me specifically, and it's a message from the committee, that they value Alabama's 10 wins extremely high. They view Alabama's 10 wins higher than Notre Dame's 10 wins, Miami's 10 wins, Vanderbilt's 10 wins, and Texas's 9 wins. And they will not view a close Georgia loss in such a way that it knocks Alabama out of the playoffs. If you don't understand what I'm saying, let's look at the bracket here. You get a kind of a clearer look at it here. So this is per CBS Sports. So you can see the 4 buys right there. But you can see Alabama versus Oklahoma, 9 versus 8 in the opening round. But you'll notice some of the other games there. You have Notre Dame with 2 losses, again, number 10. Right there, you're going to have, obviously, conference champions of the ACC and whoever wins that group of 5 deal and gets in there, which I absolutely hate, but it is what it is. But you'll notice right here, Alabama isn't the 11. They're not the 10 like Notre Dame, for example. Right, they're right behind, the 1-loss Oklahoma, or the 2-loss Oklahoma, the 1-loss Ole Miss, the 1-loss A&M. right? They're right in the thick of it. The committee very deliberately did not make Alabama the 12 seed or the 11 seed or even the 10 seed, right? They deliberately put Crimson Tide all the way up to the 9 seed, and there was reason for that. Anyone who's a big golf fan understands that one of the challenges when you're down in golf, it's not just the number of strokes you're down, right? In terms of, hey, listen, I'm at -5, the leader's at -7 or -8, whatever. I'm only 2 or 3 strokes back. The reality is the number of players that are in front of you, right? Okay, if you're at -5 and the leader's at -8, but there's 28 players at -6 and -7, you're in trouble because it's not just getting up to -8 and being the leader. You're going to stay ahead of 28 other players. But if it's just you at -5, the leader at -8, that's only one guy to catch, right? It's an easier, road to hoe. I think everyone understands that who follows golf. Very similar thing in reverse here for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Because they are ranked currently both in the bracket and in the standings as a top 10 team, that means that they have to fall behind a bunch of other teams. And you notice a lot of these teams aren't playing. Notre Dame's not playing. Miami ain't playing. Texas, not playing. Vanderbilt's not playing. Right? The 11 and 12 seeds, those are already conference championship slots. Those are baked into the cake. Right? Those are going to make it no matter what. So Alabama can't fall behind a conference champ. They're already in. So even if Alabama loses and Notre Dame is still in, who leapfrogs? How far does Alabama fall? Do you have Alabama falling behind an ACC champ like Virginia, for example? That ain't going to happen, right? Or how about the James Madison or whoever out of the group of 5? Is that going to happen? Of course not. Absolutely not. Not going to happen. Now, there is a world where if Alabama loses badly and a bunch of other things happen, could they fall out? Absolutely. That's a fact. That can happen. We all understand. That's why the Crimson Tide should win, to just handle business, take care of business. But if they play close and pay competitive, it's very clear to me, looking at the graphic here, looking at the situation, that the committee says, Alabama, you're in. Just don't embarrass us Saturday, and you're going to make it. It's obvious. They're the highest ranked 2-loss team outside of Oklahoma. Oklahoma gets a tiebreaker because the Sooners beat the Tide. Right now, as long as Alabama is competitive, the committee is saying very clearly, very loudly, you're in. Play well. Even if you don't win, but if you play well, avoid any disastrous injury, you're in. And I think that puts the Crimson Tide in a great spot ahead of the SEC championship game. All right, we got a little bit more to get to today, but first, Alabama fans in the comment section below, obviously massive matchup this weekend. Want to hear your prediction, right? I feel like this Alabama-Georgia SEC championship game matchup that we've had so much, just it means a lot just because of, I understand the SECs have changed with, the divisions and all that, but I've always loved the East versus West dynamic. There's been some great games in the past, 32-28, that tackle on deflected pass, and that one comes to mind. It's just been, how about the physical dominance a couple of years ago, running the football to upset Georgia and Nick Saban? Like, we remember those games. There's been a lot of great Georgia-Alabama games. Give us your prediction. Final score, Alabama, Georgia. Put it in the comment section below. Who's going to be the SEC champion, why, and a final score. But let's get into this matchup, guys, because it's obviously a tantalizing one. So let's pull up ESPN's analytics here, talk about the matchup specifically. And boy, oh boy, interesting development here. Per ESPN analytics, despite Georgia being obviously a top 5 team, Alabama is a slight, ever so slight favorite, according to their analytical model. 51.1% chance of winning for the Tide, 48.9% for Georgia. Now, to be fair, that's essentially 50-50. In the analytics, when you talk about ESPN analytics, they heavily weight quarterback play. Ty Simpson's been outstanding for the most part, so I think that's essentially the tiebreaker. Although Gunnar Stockton for Georgia, he's had a really nice season as well from his perspective. But I think the fact that Georgia right here is not on a neutral site per analytics, and in the analytics model, they factor in everything, right? FPI, performance, roster, where the game is played, all that kind of stuff, injuries. They throw everything into the model here. The fact that Georgia's technically a slight underdog per the model, that is interesting to me because, again, Georgia has a higher ranking, right? They've obviously got a better record. They're in a better spot. Everything that you look at from an outside perspective, Georgia should be a favorite, probably 60-40, I would guess. But Alabama, I know Alabama beat Georgia, but that was a long time ago. It was a close game. You never know how those things go. Alabama being a very slight, again, we're talking, 2.2% edge here, very, very tiny, essentially 50-50. But the analytics give the tiebreaker to the Tide. That's not nothing. And I think that's something to really focus on if you're a Tide fan. I think it goes back to the quarterback position. And again, push come to shove, big games, quarterback play matters. That's why they went Ty Simpson, who's a good athlete for sure, but he's no Russell, he's no Milroe. He's much more of a game manager, pocket passer, clutch performer. Saw that against Auburn, right? That's what wins playoff games in today's college football world. That's what wins championships in today's college football world. Just like the NFL game, it's about postseason quarterback play in the NFL world, right? Third downs, red zone, making the big throws, the backbreakers, right? That's why guys like Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, right, so phenomenal in their careers, managing the game, taking care of the football, making those big throws. Ty Simpson, much more that kind of guy than Gunnar Stockton. Nothing against Stockton. I think he's a great quarterback. I think Simpson, I trust a little bit more, and I think the analytics feel the same way. But where it gets interesting is that the odds makers are a little bit different. They've got the Bulldogs as a 2.5-point favorite on a neutral site. Now, it is in Georgia, so you can almost call that a mini home game, although I kind of discount that just a little bit. But what's very interesting is that obviously the odds have been open for a long time now. Nothing has shifted. Nothing. No dollars have come in one way or the other. The Bulldogs opened at a 2.5-point favorite. It hasn't shifted at all. The over-under hasn't shifted, right? Everything's been just 100% stagnant. That's courtesy of DraftKings odds right there. To me, that's a sign that everyone looks at the 2.5-point spread from Georgia and says, I ain't touching this game. Not touching it. No idea where it's going to go, which is very interesting. I think people understand this is going to be a close competitive game. Georgia doesn't blow anybody out for the most part. They've had a lot of comebacks. Ty Simpson, I think, is an X factor at the quarterback position. He's better than Stockton. He's made the difference in a lot of Alabama victories this year. I think Georgia, according to the odds makers, you can agree or disagree on this, has a better roster, more experienced roster. But when it comes to the most important position on the field, Alabama is better. And I think there's some people that still don't trust Kalen DeBoer, and that's fair. If you want to have a tiebreaker be the coach, Kirby Smart, better pedigree than DeBoer at this point. Obviously, Kalen DeBoer can make his statement here, winning the SEC in his second season. Boy, would that turn some minds around there in Tuscaloosa if in his second year, which, by the way, did Nick Saban win the SEC in his second year? I'm not saying DeBoer will win this game, but boy, oh boy, if he does, you talk about riding the shift in one calendar year. Of course, the playoffs behind that will go a long way too, one way or the other. But I think Kalen DeBoer is heading into this game right now, per the odds makers, with a little bit of a disadvantage. They trust Kirby Smart more, and I think that's why. And of course, the records play a role too: 11-1 versus 10-2. I think that's why the odds makers have Georgia a slight favorite, but there's no big money coming in one way or the other. Everyone's like, listen, we don't necessarily know what we're going to get from DeBoer in Alabama, but we're not whole hog on Georgia either, right? We like this game being essentially a pick 'em. That's what the odds are showing. And listen, it's going to be a heck of a game. When push comes to shove, my opinion is this, guys. I trust quarterback play. It's playoffs. It's championship game. Give me the quarterback I trust more. And as good as Gunnar Stockton is, and he's a good player, I trust Ty Simpson more. And I think this Saturday, that will be the difference.